All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started here. Last class of the class, right? Or the course. So last class of the course. Incident management. We're going to go over several different things, mostly triage. We'll also talk a little bit about terrorism and things like that. And these are some of the things that we have that affects us today. So um, there's a lot to that sort of stuff. I'll try not to go off on a tangent. But there's again, there's a ton of other information that, you know, whether you're fire service or law enforcement or military or whatever, you need to get some more information on. You definitely need to seek out some more training in those areas, just because, it can happen at any time, in any place. It doesn't have to be a big city, doesn't have to be a big event. So, please reach out and get some more information on these types of things that we're going to talk about tonight. So it's talking about hazardous materials incidents here, and you should know that, be able to identify the signs of that. Realistically, there's a lot of different things out there, but ultimately there's some references for you. There's some guidebooks and things like that, but it's essentially just trying to do some research and some homework on some of the things that are in your area. So whether it's freight truck, rail car, um, aircraft, any of these types of things, or it could just be manufacturing. So we have manufacturing, I think, places in this area, different types of manufacturing. So any number of these things can have hazmat or hazardous materials involved in them. But a hazardous materials incident is essentially, or hazardous materials in general, are substances that are toxic, poisonous, radioactive, flammable, or explosive, and can cause death or injury with exposure. So essentially, your top priority is to protect yourself and bystanders from exposure and contamination. This is not one of those things where we can just kind of, go up there and bust a window on the flaming car and try to pull somebody out. It doesn't work like that. Okay. You have to be very careful about what area you are in, or else you will become a patient very fast. Most of these things that are really, serious, dangerous to life and health, are just that. And they do it quickly. So, it's usually not a slow onset type thing. It's a lot of times it's going to be a choking hazard. It's going to be, again, an inhalation type hazard, something like that. Or it's going to be exposure to your skin, that sort of stuff. So there are definitely a majority of these things that are actually listed by themselves are bad, and then when you start mixing them with other ones or other things, they can get even worse. So sometimes just adding air or water will counteract. But just like we've talked about with some of the other poisons and things, it's good to identify the substance involved. All right. So we, sometimes it's not as easy as that, but we can again use some resources to try to do that. Federal law requires that all vehicles containing certain quantities of hazardous materials display a hazardous materials placard. So here's a little fun fact for you. The magic number is 1,000 pounds. Okay. So if, let's take the Walmart truck, for instance. The Walmart truck could have 999 pounds of propane, little small propane bottles used for camping, right? They could have 999 pounds of bleach. They could have 999 pounds of oil for, motor oil or something like that, cooking oil, anything along those lines. So any number of explosives, flammables, anything like that, that Walmart truck could have 999 pounds of it and not have to have a placard. If you think about it, look at the last time you driven by a Walmart truck and tell me if you ever saw a placard on one. You probably didn't. Okay. So does that make it any less hazardous? Absolutely not. Right. So, but just by federal regulations, they don't have to placard it. Okay, so they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops. They don't have, their driver doesn't have to be hazmat driver certified and all this other stuff. So, so again, just remember that it doesn't have to be. We had one not too long ago, had a very serious accident on the interstate. One vehicle driver was deceased. It was a very serious accident anyway, had to be extricated, but he was hauling an enclosed trailer with some type of it was like a cleaner, like it was a chemical, but it was an unfiltered cleaner. It was very strong acidic type cleaner, and it was in it's kind of in a protected type metal encasement with a plastic barrel basically inside of it. And so it took us a minute after kind of looking around to try to see what was in there, that we realized that, hey, this is some type of chemical in here, right? So it doesn't have to be, and it wasn't, it might have been a couple hundred gallons. But so that right there, could have easily ended up rolling over, opening up, leaking out, that sort of thing, and may have not been just the world's worst chemical. However, it could have made it really hard for us to breathe, depending on the wind and the temperature and all that stuff. So it could be a really bad day for you. And so that's one of those things where it's really important for you to identify these things. The placard should include a 4-digit identification number, also referred to as the UNID number. UNID number. All right. So looking at these. So looking at these placards that you see here, these are kind of just generic placards that show you different color schemes and different pictorial schemes that they have. So all the ones for explosives, as you can see up here, are in orange. So it goes from into the 1.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And that gives you, that essentially tells you what level of explosive it is. The greens are usually going to be like oxygen it typically is green. So like oxygen, your oxygen tanks that you have on the medical oxygen side will have some form of green or green placarding on it. Yellows are usually oxidizers. Reds are usually flammable. And then you have toxics type, things that are usually black and white. The corrosives are going to be that little 2 beakers kind of pouring. Looks like it's starting to deteriorate whatever it's being poured on. So that's a corrosive. There's also 9 hazard classes. The 9 hazard classes, as you can see on all these different placards, they don't have the 4-digit UNID number on them just yet, but they would have it somewhere in the middle, and it would tell you that number, and then it would have the same scheme that you see here. But also at the bottom of the placard, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.3, 7, 6, 8, right? So those things indicate the hazard class in which it falls into. So one of the reasons that they do things like this is that you can see the color, you can see the hazard class, you can see the number, okay, or the pictograph. So that if this vehicle or mode of transportation or whatever has this placard on it, if it is completely mangled, burning, something, right, you can potentially see through your binoculars just the number 2 at the bottom corner. All right. That gives you a little bit of indication to say, this is a flammable gas, okay, or a flammable liquid, right, which would be 3. So it just depends on what that number is. So each of those hazard classes represents, each one of those numbers represents the hazard class. So again, you have explosives, flammable liquids, flammable gases, or flammable gases, flammable liquids, and so on and so forth. There's, like I said, there's 9 of them, and essentially it represents all those ones. So corrosives and radioactives and oxidizers and all those different types of things. We're not going to get into all the big hazmat lesson, but there's again, a lot of things that plays into hazmat. And again, just simple things like that, though, you can kind of revert back to and see what that is. And I'll give you a reference here later if it doesn't pull it up. But the emergency response guidebook, and it's something that most fire departments and ambulances usually have, and some cops probably have it too. But it's updated every few years. And they have, oh, there it is right there. So it's updated every few years, and they generally look like that. And essentially, it's a guide of all the known hazard chemicals in the world. And so they cross-reference it a couple different ways. So you can look it up by the name of the chemical, by the UNID number, and things like that. So it's a pretty easy book to look at. In the front, there's that chart that you just saw and several others, along with the 9 hazard class list, is in there. So you can reference all that stuff really fast and get a better idea what you're dealing with. However, this book and its information that it gives you, once you cross-reference it, it's going to bring you to some orange pages, and the orange pages will give you very, very basic information about how far to get away, what to do if you come into contact with a chemical, how if it's a big spill, a small spill, a large spill, whether it's day or night. So it's good for about 10 minutes. Okay, so the first 10 minutes you arrive on scene, you pull out this book, you start getting some information. You're gonna start to kind of run out of information to utilize in this book. There are other resources out there, but again, this one's a great place to get started. So again, unless you have some type of specific hazmat training, then you need to stay away from that contaminated area. It is going to be difficult for you to do that sometimes, especially when you can see patients. When you have patients laying on the ground, when patients are, choking and stumbling towards you and all this other sort of stuff and yelling out for you to come help them and all these other things, right? Again, if you don't have the PPE, if you don't have the training, you're going to become another victim. Okay, that's not what you're there for. You're there to help them. So again, you can't help them if you are in their same situation. Obviously, we want to notify dispatch or our chain of command that we presume that there's hazardous materials involved. Again, if you have sustained victims who have sustained an acute injury as a result of exposure need to be identified, pretty quickly, because they may not be just completely out of it and can't talk and walk and everything else. They may, again, you may get them that are able to do that, but they are still contaminated with whatever that is. So they have the potential to cross-contaminate with you. All right. So again, if you are going to be doing that treatment before they are decontaminated, you need to make sure that you are protected and that you're able to, again, like I said, protect yourself first. If you can remove them from the contaminated area or talk to them and have them direct them to do that, that would be the best place to be. So uphill, upwind is usually a good place for them to be, but not so close to all the other people who are responding so they don't cross-contaminate them. So very few specific antidotes or treatments exist for most hazardous materials injuries. A lot of times it's just reducing the exposure, so getting the product off of them and neutralizing whatever it is. But as far as actual treatments, usually some type of skin burn, respiratory issue, that sort of thing. Like I said before, if you're going to stay in EMS, fire service, law enforcement, it's a good idea to take some type of hazard awareness or operations training. It's usually doesn't take that long to do, and really great information, and will really kind of open your eyes to what the potential is there, and some of the things that you can do kind of at the operations level is most, it's all defensive, but nonetheless, you kind of have a better idea of how we can decontaminate and how we can better care for our patients. So situations that involve mass casualty incidents are very stressful, especially for us, because everybody's trying to pull us in a different direction. It requires a very different method of operation from other emergency medical calls. So a lot of times, going back to hazmat, right? So if we have a group of people that have been exposed to something at a warehouse, right? So you may have 4 or 5 people that are exposed to this chemical that got spilled on the floor, right, in this warehouse. So it's important to remember that we have that essentially a mass casualty incident is anything that's going to tax the services in which you have, or the resources and services that you have available to you. Okay, so if there's a 2-vehicle accident with 2 people in each car at the south end of the county, there's probably going to be 2 ambulances there. If everybody's getting transported to the hospital, there's potentially you could have 3, depending on the severity of the patient, right? So serious trauma patients, they're probably not going to have 2 people in the same truck. So it's important for you to remember that there may be 2 to 3 ambulances on one wreck at the south end of the county. At the north end of the county, we have a warehouse that has something leaking, and now we have 5 or 6 patients that have severe respiratory distress and need to go by the ambulance. So you might be able to do 1 or 2 in each ambulance like that. However, they still have to be deconned. Their ambulance is going to be on scene for a while, and that sort of thing. So it's so we can quickly overload our system with just a couple calls. All right. So again, if you take into account the same thing with a vehicle accident or something along those lines, it could just be one church van, right? Going a bunch of young folks going to a church retreat or something like that in the summertime, and you have you say you have a 10-passenger van, right? And maybe 6 out of those 10 are injured enough that they need to go to the hospital by ambulance. Depending on the level of severity of the injuries involved, again, you might be able to put 2 people in one ambulance, but again, if they're a serious trauma case, they're not. They're gonna go by themselves. So, again, it's one of those things that we have to, be prepared for, and you really need to be. And we're going to start talking about triage here in a minute, and that's one of those things where you really got to get some more training and practice it. Because it will quickly overload what you have going on. So variables in mass casualty incidents, essentially the severity of the crash, access routes, available resources, response times, levels of emergency training, and overall experience of the EMS system. So again, if you have all these things, and if you have several of these things already going against you, it's going to be even more difficult. And so that's one of the reasons why we call for whatever resources we think we're going to need based off of the dispatch information, and go ahead and have them coming, right? If we don't need them, we turn them around. Not a big deal. But if we get there and we run into some kind of crazy call or some kind of big mass casualty incident, which again doesn't have to be but 2 vehicles or one church van, right? So 1 vehicle accident can be a mass casualty incident. So again, call for those resources early and often. So your goal should be to provide the greatest medical benefit for the greatest number of people. So that's one of the reasons why when we get into triage, is that we really want to try to make sure that the people who are the worst off get the treatment the fastest, right? So match the patient's medical needs with the appropriate treatment and transportation. Sometimes, this is talking about the visual survey. So as you're on the way to the scene, prepare your prepare mentally. We've talked about that, where that patient assessment kind of starts, with the dispatch information. We start to formulate an idea in our head of what's going on. Same thing with the overall scene that we need to manage. So where will these additional units come from? How long will it take them to arrive? Do I need some type of specialized equipment like hazmat or extrication or something along those lines, forcible entry? So any of these things could, again, start adding to our treatment time, our transport time, all that sort of stuff. So definitely something that we have to wrap our heads around really fast, start to make sense of everything. Hey, who's in what vehicle? How many do we have? Who's injured? How bad are they? Right? We need to own that, because there'll be cops walking around trying to do reports and get tags off of vehicles and driver's licenses, and there's family and friends running around and bystanders trying to do this and that and all this other stuff. Everybody's running up to you trying to tell you this, that, and everything else. All right? So it's important for you to own that scene and find out the facts. Okay. If we don't need to go off of, well, I think there might be somebody in that car. I don't know where the other one went. No, I need to know where these people are, what their status is. All right. And you have to own that scene from then on. But again, staying calm, again, focusing on those things will help you to stay calm and work through the problems. Again, make a visual assessment of the scene. So we want to know, how many patients do we have, and what is the severity of their injuries, right? How much and what kind of help, you can provide or that you need, right? So knowing that, if it's, like I said, you have a really bad trauma case and they have to be intubated, they have to do all this other stuff, and everything's going on, they're barely breathing and everything else, then we have to, we're really going to have to be able to focus on that patient. We can't just leave that patient hanging out there by themselves for any length of time. So it's important for us to gain all that information so that we can start to triage our patients, which we'll get into. So once we know that, it's a good idea, whether it's, whether you're fire-based or law enforcement or whatever, letting dispatch know so they can relay it to the ambulance or however your system works. But we need to try to, let them know just a general idea of what our patient status is, right? That helps the rest of the system in place that is coming to you to help to manage their response as well. So if it's only one ambulance coming and you get there and it's a church van of 16 people or 10 people, then, and 6 are injured, we need to know that so the ambulance can know, oh man, I need to get the helicopter. I need to get more ambulances. I need to pull some ambulances from some other location. And I need to get maybe tone out some more fire departments for more additional assistance, things like that. If the ambulance is the only, and this is another thing too, the ambulance that arrives first for AAA in this area is the dedicated triage unit. So they can't, if they have other patients on scene, they can't just load up a patient and leave. Okay? It doesn't work like that. They essentially would be abandoning those other patients. So unless there's somebody there to take care of them. So again, that's one of those things where, you have to be ready for that ambulance to be there for a minute and have to start sorting things out. However, if we already have that done for them by the time they get there, and we have them a good count of what's going on, how many people and injuries and everything else, then we can really start to speed up that patient care process. So letting them know we use, again, just an initial radio report. We all use radios, shouldn't be that difficult, but sometimes we get mixed up and convoluted in the things we want to say. So again, keep it simple, clear language. You want to use a bunch of 10 codes and things like that. Be concise, calm. Don't shout into the microphone. Even though it's a bad call, there's people bleeding everywhere and people, dying and all this other stuff. All right. And cars crumpled and people yelling and screaming and everything else. Take a second, walk away from that, or try to tell everybody to calm down, lower their voice or whatever, so you can talk on the radio and give a good, clear report. That report needs to have the location of the incident. If there's a more concise, accurate location, let us know that. Type of the incident, of course, if the incident is different than the one you got dispatched to, we want to know that as well. Any hazards. So again, if this thing is on a power line, is it, is there a tree on top of it? Any number of hazards that may arise that we've spoken about before. We want to know those things as well. Approximate number of patients and the type of assistance required. So I have 6 patients. I have, we're going to get into to different colors and numbers and things like that here in a minute, the triage, but I have 2 red patients, 2 yellow patients, and 1 green patient. And, I have one that is black. Black would be deceased. So, that lets our dispatch, it doesn't operate off of that system yet. But if you go not too close to our neighbors to the south of us, do that. And so it automatically, they know they can relay those numbers and colors to the ambulance, and the ambulance knows, hey, I got 2 serious patients. I got 2 patients that are they're serious, but they're not life threatening. And then I have one that is deceased. Right. So just that quick, we can start to get the ball moving. So good rule of thumb, request 1 ambulance for every 5 patients. And again, that's just patients in general. Whether they're going to be transported or not is usually those numbers start to go way down when we start talking about going to the hospital. People start changing their mind. They start feeling like they're not that bad off. So again, just one of those things, just a good rule of thumb. It's not an absolute. So in calling for additional resources, determine the perimeters. For emergency vehicles only, we want to make sure that they have a way in and out. So if it is a vehicle extrication, we need to make sure that the fire truck can get in there, the rescue truck can get in there, and do what they need to do. They don't need to be far away. They don't need to carry all that stuff. They're going to have a lot of things that they need to work with. So leave them a space, and we don't need to park right up on the vehicle. If you're there in POV, or if you're there even in an ambulance, we can kind of get out of the way a little bit, and most of our stuff is pretty portable. But on the fire truck, a lot of that stuff, it's heavy and cumbersome, and so leave them a little bit of room. So establish a one-way route for emergency vehicles to approach the scene and a separate one for them to exit. So make sure they have a way in and out. So when calling for additional resources, allow adequate room for emergency vehicles that need to be close to the scene, like we're just talking about. Keep vehicles and personnel who are not necessarily needed at the scene at a staging area. So again, if you have people that you have responding, you're not sure if you're going to need them, say, hey, just stage up at the, this mile marker, or, just pull up in front of the incident, go pull past the incident, pull up in front. And if I don't need you, you can go ahead and get on out of here. That way they're not stuck behind all the traffic and everything else. They can pull up in front, and as soon as they get ready to go, they can go. So casualty sorting essentially is called triage, and essentially it means to sort. So like I was just mentioning to you, it's a way for us to organize and manage these patients, so that the person who needs the care first gets it first. And so we're not just kind of willy-nilly just going around and coming up to the first person we find and going, oh, let me clean this blood off your face, and let me look at your finger. No, we're not worried about all that. All right, if they're breathing and talking and all that stuff, we're good. Okay, and we're going to get into that in a second. Should be simple and fast, and that most of these triage systems are. Don't worry about diagnosing patients. We're not worried about a bunch of vital signs and everything else. But it's important that we try to pick those patients apart in about 60 seconds, right, or less. And essentially, it's breathing, circulation, and mental status. That's really all we're worried about, the big three. Logan, do you see casualty sorting on your screen?
Yeah, there's no problems with the screens or anything.
Okay. It's not catching up on my end.
I see casualty sorting 2 of 13, triage tagging.
You got it. Okay. Good deal. All right. So patient tagging is essentially just a way for us to mark those patients that we were just talking about. As you can see, they're red, yellow, green, and then black. So we all know these colors, right? They exist on a a stoplight, right? So pretty simple to understand. Green is usually means that you can go. Yellow's kind of in the middle, like I'm not too sure, and then red is you need to stop, right? So most of those things are synonymous with good, bad, and worse. Okay, so that's kind of how we need to think about it. But again, it helps so that others can come behind us and know right off the bat what we're talking about. So if it's colors or if it's an actual tag, that again is very simple, just gives a general area of where they're injured, a general synopsis of what their name is, maybe date of birth, whatever information we can try to get out of them. So again, if we have a plane crash and we have 165 of these people scattered all over 5 acres, we need to we really have to sort these people out and kind of group them together. That's just going to make it so much more easy for ambulances and other response units to be able to provide care and transportation and everything else. Sometimes for some of these big incidents like this, terrorist attacks and things like that, if they have walking and wounded people who can stand up and walk around, may just have an arm injury or something like that, or have lacerations or something, they'll put them on a bus, right? So just bring a school bus or a special medical bus up there and just load all these walking wounded people up on there and take them to the hospital and let them be seen that way. Obviously in due time, or they can start to work on them in some other type of capacity, whether it's an exterior type tent environment or something like that. But nonetheless, it's important to organize them and tag them. So if you do have somebody who's a yellow, they're bad off. They have broken bones. They have, they're not able to walk. Things like that. And for some reason they have some type of internal injury that we didn't notice early on that's gotten worse, and now all of a sudden they've progressed from a yellow to a red, right? We need to be able to annotate that. We need to be able to keep our eyes open for that. So like I said before, the triage tagging categories are priority 1, which is red tag, is immediate care. Injuries are life-threatening, right? So there's an airway issue, there's a bleeding issue. That's something we can't control, and they need to go right now. Priority 2 is a yellow tag, is urgent care that can delay up to an hour. So like I said, if you have some moderate bleeding or some other type of something that's just taking a longer time to affect that patient, then again, it's going to be something that's not life threatening, but it is a serious injury, like I said, like a fracture, like a serious fracture, long bone fracture, something like that. Then we can kind of delay that and put them in the yellow category. Then green essentially is delayed up to 3 hours. We refer to those, like I said, as walking wounded. So those patients will will generally move or are able to move around and kind of take care of themselves and that sort of thing. The the fourth one is the black and or gray. Some of them gone to gray. Those patients are deceased or they will be deceased before we can transport them. Again, when we have all these patients, sometimes they may still have a heartbeat, they may have some agonal breathing, something like that, but they're just not going to make it to the hospital. And that's one of those things where you need to have a good understanding of what the patient status is before you make that determination. But of course, miracles happen or whatever, but for the most part, these are the patients that are going to die pretty quick. So the first step in START, all right, so this is START triage, is get up and walk, right? And so one of the big ones, there's another one called SALT triage, which is a really simple one as well. Both of them are just fine, just like I said, just whichever one you use most often. And essentially what it is that we want to have, we look at a group of people laid out on the ground or whatever, right? We have several of them. So who can get up and walk and move to a specific area, right? So get up. All right. If you can hear the sound of my voice, I want you to get up and walk over here. All right. So we have 10 people, right? We get 2 of them that do that. They stand up or they stagger up or whatever, and they can move themselves on over to the green area, right? So we make a little square or something or a green mat or whatever. We say, hey, just come have a seat over here in the shade in the green area. So again, if they can walk, well, they very rarely have life-threatening injuries. These patients are the walking wounded, and again, they're going to be stuck in that green area. All right, so we'll get those out of the way first. So the second step is begin where you stand. So move through the remaining patients, stop at each patient to provide a quick assessment and tagging, find and tag the priority 1 patients, examine them, correct life-threatening injuries, so any breathing problems, bleeding issues, things like that. Again, 60 seconds for those first ones, right? So we're getting them out of the way, or less. So if we can do that, we have them moving on out of the way. So the other one usually is if you can hear the sound of my voice, sit up and look at me, right? So what that tells me is that, hey, they can't move very well. If you can move on your own, sit up and look at me, or roll over and look at me. What that does is says, all right, these people have they can move in general, so they have movement in their spine. They have cognitive ability function in their brain where they can put 2 and 2 together and listen and follow that command of roll over and look at me. So that tells me a lot. Okay, so they have that they have a decent mental status. However, they're not able to get up on their own, so they have some other issue that's going on that precludes them from doing that. So that kind of rolls them into the yellow, right? Or the priority 2 patients. So those let me know that's how I kind of group those patients. So if those are the case, I go to those patients and I'll tag them yellow, and then we'll go on to the obvious ones, which are, again, if they don't respond to anything, they're unable to move, that sort of stuff. Those are my red patients. All right, those are the ones that need to go first. Those are these ones that get treated first. All right, so again, breathing, circulation, and mental status are the main things that we're going to be looking for. So like I said, shows you here in this graphic, red is treatable life-threatening injuries, which are immediate. Serious but not life-threatening is delayed in the yellow patients, and then green is, like I said, walking wounded, minor injuries. So we talk about breathing when we're assessing these patients. It's not necessary. We're not doing like we would when we go to Granny's house and she's having difficulty breathing. Okay. Patients with breathing rates of greater than 30 breaths per minute are priority 1. Patients with breathing rates of less than 30 breaths per minute move on to the next. And then we're just going to move on to those patients and get them sorted out, because they generally are going to have some type of difficulty, right? So patients who need help maintaining an airway are priority 1. And if you are in doubt as the patient's ability to breathe, they're priority 1. So again, we're going to do a good breathing assessment real quick, and should take less than 60 seconds. And then we can make our determination what based on their breathing rate and quality, or airway ability, if their airway is not able to be opened, as to whether or not they're priority 1 or not. So patients who are not breathing and do not start breathing with airway maneuvers, unfortunately, they're going to be in that priority 4, the black. So if they're not able to breathe on their own without basic airway maneuvers or whatever, again, if we're having a bunch of patients, that's just something that we're not going to be able to do for them. Now, again, if we have 4 or 5 patients and that's kind of overwhelming everybody, overwhelming the system. However, we have several people there that we have somebody that's able to jump in there and help out and start bagging that patient, or there's a paramedic that can intubate them, and we can try that. As long as it's not going to take away from the patients who are viable, then sure, go for it. But again, you have to remember, if we have a lot of patients, we're just not going to be able to do that. Definitely not in this area of the country. This is not a big metropolitan area. We don't have, tons of ambulances. We don't have tons of, people that are on standby, say a full-time fire departments that are all over the place, every 5 miles or whatever, that are going to be able to just saturate that area and take over patient care. So circulation, check the patient's carotid pulse. Okay, so the pulse in the neck is a weak or irregular, priority 1. If they have a strong pulse, move on to the next step. All right, so we're gonna go from breathing to circulation and then mental status. So if they have a strong pulse, we're going to check their mental status. Again, a weak or irregular pulse, or a very low pulse rate, then we're going to put them at priority 1. Obviously, if they have a weak pulse, we're going to treat them for shock. Absent pulse, like I said, so if their pulse is synaptic, they're not breathing, don't have a pulse, generally we're not going to be doing CPR in the middle of an MCI. It just usually isn't feasible. However, like I said, if you have a bystander who says, "Hey, I'm CPR certified," hey, go ahead. We'll give you a BVM or something if we have it, or a mask or something maybe, and and let them help you out and try to do CPR, and maybe you can try to check back with them and see if they got a pulse back. Okay, so again, it's very unfortunate. This is part of that difficult part of being an emergency medical provider is having to deal with these types of incidents. So that third step is in casualty sorting is mental status, and that we need to determine whether the patient responds to verbal stimulus. So again, for you to stand out there amongst that group of patients and go, "Hey, can everybody hear me? If you can hear me, do this. If you can hear me, do that." And again, that helps us to identify whether or not they're responsive to that verbal stimulus. So patients who can follow simple commands, like I said, of stand up and walk or turn over and look at me and that sort of thing, they fall into priority 2. Or I'm sorry, who can only roll over and look at you or something like that, fall into priority 2. If they can get up and move, they'll be in priority 3. Like I said before, unresponsive patients who are unable to respond back to you are priority 1. So again, it's designed to help rescuers find the most seriously injured patients quickly. Injured patients do not always remain the same condition. So always remember that they can go from one to the other while they're still on scene. Okay. So, and that's, sometimes they'll embarrass you. You know what I mean? Like, you'll get there and go, "Man, this guy's bad off." Or this person's not bad at all. And then, 10 minutes later, they're on their deathbed. Right. And a lot of the times it's because of internal stuff, things that we can't see, things that we, that their pulse or respirations didn't give away 10 minutes ago. All right. So don't feel bad if that happens to you. It's just the nature of patient care. Sometimes, it happens like that, and you just have to adapt to it and move them into that other area and start to work it out. Yeah, that's too much. So, working in a mass casualty incident, the biggest thing is if you're not the first person to arrive, you need to try to find some type of incident command, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But essentially, having somebody who is in charge of everything, and then working your way out to people who are in charge of patient care, maybe vehicle extrication, or whatever these different main areas that we have working at this incident, traffic control, whatever it might be, and start to condense that circle and make sure that the person who's over patient care is talking to the people who are actually doing those things, and then the person who is doing patient extrication is only talking to the incident commander, and so the incident commander only has to talk to 2 or 3 or 4 people, 3 to 5, 3 to 7, 5 being optimal, but we don't want that incident commander to have to talk to everybody on scene about everything. Okay. And it just goes a lot more smoothly that way. So whenever we find, like I said, whenever we find those numbers and colors and all that sort of stuff, relay that to dispatch. Again, in Pearl River County, in this area, they just don't know what that is. They just don't do it. The ambulance does. They know what it is. They just don't practice it very much. However, they more than likely will understand. If you tell them, they will understand. Their dispatch will understand, but the law enforcement dispatch in this area will not. So hopefully one day we can get that changed. But however, that is something that you can still tell them, hey, I have advised the ambulance. I have 2 reds, 2 yellows, a green, and 1 black. And if they will relay it like that, then the ambulance will understand, right? But if you don't think that they're going to get it, just tell them I have, I have 2 immediate, I have 2 serious, and I have 1 delayed. 2 serious, 2 delayed, 1 minor, and 1 deceased. And you'll be, that's pretty clear as well. So clear English like that will let them know as well, kind of what you're dealing with. So as more highly trained personnel arrive, report your findings to the person in charge by noting, like I said, so if the ambulance gets there, you want to get with the paramedic and let them know, hey, listen, you're kind of in charge now. You're the highest trained person here. I have this many patients. I have, I've triaged them, and these are my colors and numbers. I think we're going to need this type of assistance. I have vehicle extrication going on over here. I need hazmat down there. I need, whatever. So all these different, any of that other important information is going to help set that person up for success when it comes to, which patients go on what ambulances and all this other stuff, and what they need in order to access the patient, treat the patient, transport the patient. So the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, for those of you who have not taken this, you need to do that. It's actually kind of the law for us to do that as emergency responders. So again, if you haven't done that, it's required by law for you to do that, federal and state. So it also helps your departments and things like that get grant money. So developed by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, provides a consistent, unified approach to handling an emergency incident. So it's kind of like an accordion, right? So we can start out real small and have 1 patient and 3 responders, and we can ultimately handle it, in a small setting like that and manage it. Now, if we blow that up and we run that accordion all the way out, and we have like Hurricane Katrina, right? So we have people all across a large geographical area,